guys, I'm Zed.
And I'm Z.
So since this is actually going out Monday, I really need to get a diffuser for that. I'm in my new office slash old office, which is why this is all back here and it's disorganized. So this will be our new recording kind of setup. We'll change it a little bit.
At least until other things occur.
Yes. We're trying to do better for the channel. And sorry about audio levels right now. We're monkey with it. So bear with us.
Yeah, we're going to toy around with it and kind of go from there.
So, and you'll see a couple other videos that have been pre-recorded in the other location. So again, bear with us. But deck tech.
Not even a deck tech. It's more so a deck philosophy.
Alright. Sorry guys, we did do a quick little test for audio. Go down below and let us know.
Yeah, let us know. Make sure everything's working up correctly here. New office, we're still tweaking the audio setup a little bit. We want to make sure it's going through, and especially since we kind of predict this might be a long video, we want to make sure it was done first.
Yes, because that is not fun having to re-record a video that you've already re-recorded several times.
Yeah,
so I wouldn't know that.
Cutting right to the point though, video. Deck building philosophies in Commander. There are a couple of ways you can do it. I'm just going to be cutting on, I'm going to focus on the big three that I generally tend to go with, just because I know a lot of people like the format, want to get into the format, or hey, how can I build differently or get that other perspective? This is kind of a way to do that, and I know certain people, even you, don't have a lot of experience building their own Commander decks from scratch. It's more so they take a pre-con and adjust it, or they kind of just slap together some cards they think look fun and cool, and that's one way that you can do it. But sometimes focusing it in a little bit more, it'll help us get to where we really want to be in terms of playing the game.
Okay, see, my problem is, like you just said, I slap together cards and go, oh, okay, I'm hoping this works. I do know that there's a somewhat formula that works and helps.
Everyone's got their own formulas, and those formulas will vary from deck to deck. A control deck will not want the same things an aggressive deck will. So, kind of focusing in on that, the first kind of deck building philosophy there is focusing with your commander and building around that ability. On the channel so far, we have seen my Torbrand deck with the 1 mythic, 5 rares, 10 uncommon restriction that I generally play with. As part of that deck, the deck is built around Torbrand, where it's going to amplify the damage of my red sources. So in order to maximize that, I want as many sources of red damage as I can get in the deck. So Dragon's Approach becomes a very, very viable card because it's a source that deals 3 plus 2, and so it's 5 to everyone at the table. If Dragon's Approach is a good card for this deck, what cards go with that? And so that's where those synergies inlay into the deck itself. Even the Fireweaver or other cards like that in the deck, when they would deal 1 damage to every player, Torbrand says, hey, I'm going to multiply that damage by adding another 2 to it. So it's effectively a lightning bolt instead of just a ping you for 1. And it makes the deck significantly better. It's a force multiplier in your command zone.
And it's a very viable deck. Now, I do have to correct you. As of recording this video, that deck tech has not gone out just yet.
Preview for future content.
That deck tech will be coming out this week. I'm setting myself up for success because I'm going to do it.
But the idea being, there's something in the works. I want to demonstrate an example of that. Other common commanders in this kind of field, where they're going to be kind of playing around like this, Gisa and Geralt from the zombie commander decks that I showcased already. They want cards in the graveyard, so we're kind of playing around the zombie tribal in the graveyard themes. But we also have cards like You all rock the Desecrated, where it's going to double up on your end of the battlefield triggers. You have many of the landfall commanders that all care about lands entering. So that's going to determine a lot of your card choices.
And that's just doing all the triggers.
Not necessarily. Not everything has to be trigger based. A lot of them will rely on those triggers, but it can be something as simple as this is a card that when you cast cares about elves. Well, that's going to determine your deck building choices that, hey, if my commander cares about elves, like Azuri, Renegade Leader, then in that kind of situation, we're going to be putting a high density of elves into the deck so you can get the most value you potentially can out of those cards.
And I have to say, I've played against his deck a little bit now. He loves his triggers and using the command. You use your commander very wise.
I try to, and not every deck I build is around the commander, like we'll kind of focus on a little bit later. But yeah, so this is the first kind of philosophy is, hey, commander intrinsically is a format that is designed around having one legendary creature at all times available to you. It's a free 8th card in your hand. Why don't you build your deck around that idea? And so that's one way you can do it. The second way you can do is you can go, hey, I have an idea of I want the deck to do a particular thing, and I will find the commander later.
Which I've seen those decks.
Yeah, and those are going to be where you're more general, like, hey, I'm going to get blue-white flyers. Okay, well, I kind of want to play with this other card too. And so you might add green for a Script Sprite or something really off the wall like that. And that's where you go from, hey, I can't run the new Kangi from Commander Legends anymore. Maybe I should go with this. Maybe I should go with Derevi. It's a bird wizard, so it's on the Flyers theme I'm wanting to do. It gives me some other ways, and now I can sneak in other cards like Edric that cares about these Flyers connecting or things like that.
Or the Boros deck, where I've actually played my Boros deck with 3 different commanders.
Yeah, and ultimately it's one of those, in these kind of things, the commander is less imperative to your overall strategy as much as it's a card that kind of helps bring that theme forward. And so in these kind of situations where it's like, okay, I'm building flyers. Well, my commander's going to fly, but it gives me access to colors. And these are kind of like the general examples. Obviously, not everyone likes to build these types of decks because they can feel a little bit too much like our next category of good stuff, or generalist, but...
Wouldn't you say the slivers would fall under that?
Slivers very much so fall into like this kind of category because ultimately you know you're building around the slivers in the deck. It doesn't matter what's in your command zone, you're building around your slivers. So this is kind of one of those aspects where your commander doesn't so much make the difference. It's the cards in the 99 that bring the theme together.
And then the sliver your commander sliver just adds to the flavor.
It just kind of takes your deck in a particular direction. Some people may want the tutor slivers. Some people may want the protection to give everything indestructible. Some people may want the value out of the Cascade one. So there's a couple of ways you can do it. It's really more so dependent on your personal preference.
By the way, Wizards of the Coast, if you're watching, bring back slivers because I love them. No. Please, for me.
But kind of sneaking into our third category there is going to be your general good stuffs. It's going to be something where you're not really building around a particular theme, so it may not be necessarily a landfall deck. It may not necessarily be a deck around your commander. It may not be one of these decks that focus heavily on a tribe or a
control deck.
This is where our general control decks, our general value decks, our general sack decks are going to kind of follow, because they're not so much into those specific themes as much as overall. And so rather than us going, oh, well, I'm playing, instant sorcery, the deck, which is one deck you can build, and that can be in that middle category because that's your pretty heavy theme. Control can be every aspect of things. You can be getting your value from your creatures, your artifacts, your enchantments, everything. So it's really that line of, these are very similar ideas, but the idea is how thematic is the deck is going to be that determine what side of the fence it's on, really. And this would be something like, okay, I'm playing Dragon Lord Ojutai. It's a control deck. Here's my here's my 6, 7 Wraths. Here's my 10, 12, 14 counter spells. And all you're trying to do is you're going to get there with your commander because he's giving you some draw power, but your deck doesn't actually synergize or do a thing. It's more so meant about letting this one card kind of through long grindy advantage get you to the game. And it's not like a traditional like synergistic theme. Like, oh hey, I'm playing aristocrats in a traditional sense where I'm going to loot things in and out of the graveyard. It's not me playing elf ball. It's not me playing, zombies. So it's one of those, that's kind of the differentiation I tend to make with it. But these are also the ways I tend to see like the deck building is there's build it from your commander and work down, and then there's build from the bottom with the cards and work your way to the commander. But from the build your way from your cards to your commander, that's where we really see the biggest divergence of deck building strategy.
So you don't have like X amount of monsters, X amount of this, X amount of that?
No, because every deck's going to want something different. And, if a creature spell has flash, well then I can also kind of treat it like an instant.
True.
Kind of going back to our second category, you could build a deck around the card, just for example, Mystical Teachings. It's a card that will tutor from your deck for a card with flash, or that's an instant. It's got flashback. So you could build a deck entirely built around playing an instant speed. Everyone's turn is my turn.
Yeah.
And I've played this. The only card I ran, I think maybe 10 cards in the deck that weren't able to be played on somebody else's turn, including my commander.
Damn.
So
yep.
In that case, it's one of those, you take that and you work from that card and build out your deck. It's not so much focused on the commander. So
was it that the deck that you dropped the land on your turn and went past?
Yeah, it's very much a land go deck because I don't care what happens on my turn. All my cards are able to be played on other people's turns. I can respond to the evolving board state.
Okay.
So with that, that's kind of the general ideas. Though, just kind of when I'm building decks, if I kind of know what I want to do, for the most part, I do try to focus in on a couple of key aspects. Normally, you want to, unless you're a hyper aggressive deck and you want to be the aggressor at the table, you want to be able to kind of break a board state and try to establish more parity. Normally, you're going to do that with board wipes. Generally, most decks don't want more than 2 or 3 of them, but sometimes it's one of those, especially if you're the control deck and you want to keep things off the board, it's worth it to do that. Yeah. So board wipes are a thing I kind of keep in mind. Single target or spot removal, being able to selectively pick the scariest things on the board and make them go away, that's pretty important, especially in interactive Magic. Counter spells can fall into this category. If I'm playing a control deck, they're 2 separate categories. If I'm playing a traditional, hey, I'm playing like a Sargwyn, or I'm playing, Queen Marchesa, or I'm playing, Yarick. These are the same things. They're going to be the same kind of category, but in control, I tend to separate those out because that's going to help you survive.
Yeah, I've seen that. I don't know how to build a deck. My zombie deck, I did modify it for my commander, and as you can see behind Z over here is my magic cards. I will be attempting to build a deck from scratch. We'll see how it works.
Yeah. And in Commander, because the multiplayer aspect of the game is very political, so even being at the forefront, having the best deck, sometimes politics will burn you in the end. Sometimes for threat assessment will say, hey, you're going to just dominate this game. It's just the way it goes sometimes. However, things that kind of help you get a little bit of extra advantage. Being faster than your opponent by being able to ramp. When I say ramp, I'm referring to cards like Rampant Growth, Cultivate, Kadama's Reach, where I go find basic lands out of my deck and put them into play, therefore accelerating my mana, or finding cards like Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, cards like that are going to be artifacts that'll help me accelerate and get mana on the board. You also have cards such as Llanowar Elves, or any of the other mana creatures that can tap and add mana. So there's a couple of ways you can ramp, but ramp is pretty important in Commander just because if someone's got 13 mana and you got 2, that's a massive disparity that's going to change the game. You want to be the one ahead of the game without overstepping and putting yourself in political mire. So generally, from personal experience, it tends to be best to be the second person at the table, not the first. If you can get away with doing it in a non-obvious way, then first is fine, but that's generally the best way to approach it.
Or if you're trying to be the aggro deck, ramping right off the back and just going for it. Hey, it works.
Yeah, and the aggressive decks don't have to be that aggressive about their lands or their ramp, because they're going to be generally lower to the ground. They don't care that they're going to go ahead and their opponents are going to be going, okay, cool, here's my 4, 5, 6 mana creature, when here's my 6 2-drop. Generally, the way they're going to kind of want to get in is our next category, which is card draw. They want to keep in the game so they're not running out of gas. These longer decks want to be able to have cards in hand so they have resources available to them.
You see, I need to figure out a way of keeping, as you said, the gas in the hand.
Yeah,
I always run out.
So
cards.
sometimes every color is got their own levels of dealing with that, and as much as WotC has told us they're working on it, we're seeing slowly that it's starting to trickle into white. Red's getting the impulse draw, but they're also getting wheels. Green is getting every kind of draw. I'm exaggerating just a little bit, but they're getting a lot of creature-based draw. Blue is your traditional draw color, so they've always had a lot of this. And black has a lot of draw at the cost of life. So every one of these colors have ways they want to draw. And then there are artifacts out there that will help you draw. Equipment that when you attach it to a creature will draw you cards. Ultimately, at the end of the day, draw power is out there. You just kind of have to be able to find it. And unfortunately, I know not all of it is cheap. I know I'm not advocating for you to go spend a bunch of money on a Sword of Fire and Ice. Instead, I might say, hey, have you tried, some of these other cheaper options?
I would recommend cheaper options. I like cheaper options most of the time.
Yeah, so ultimately, it's one of those. Draw power is pretty important in the format. It kind of helps you keep parity. And generally, after those main categories where there's the interaction or the parity breakers, then you have your, then you're going to have your ramp and your draw. Then you're kind of getting to your other spots of the deck. What do you want the theme to do? I know some people will recommend every deck have graveyard interaction or graveyard hate. Ultimately, that's kind of a meta call. You need to know what you're going to be going up against. In general, if you don't know what you're going to be going up against, most of the best value decks in Commander tend to abuse the graveyard. So having a card or two allocated to that role in your deck, especially if you can recur them yourself, may not be a bad aspect to pick up on. But if you know nobody in your area really uses the graveyard too much, it's a safe card you don't have to include.
It's one of those nice cards to have in there just in case.
Yep.
Because Commander doesn't have a sud deck.
No. I know for a while a lot of people used to, and I'm not sure, maybe they still do, play with what they called wish boards for cards like Glittering Wish and Burning Wish and all of that. But that's kind of taken a back seat here in the last few years that I've noticed, where they would have 10 cards set aside to be able to do that. That said, ultimately that's going to be a decent kind of starting point. Ultimately, if you know what you want to do, you can work from there. I generally, in my decks, I tend to prefer to be about 37 to 38 land, my commander, and then I try to run about 8 to 12 ramp and draw spells. Ultimately, 20% of the deck is helping it function. I do like interaction, so I tend to run about 8 to 10 pieces of interaction. All of it, if I can fit it on theme, I want to fit it on theme. So for example, in a token deck, I want it to be reliant on my tokens, or if I've got a board wipe that I can use in my token deck that's based around tokens and bounce, then I want to be able to do that. Ultimately, I try to keep as many of these tools that I need to have to make the deck function on theme possible. That way, I'm still on theme, I'm splashing a little bit less, so my deck's a little bit more focused and refined, while still getting the availability or the playability out of it I want to have.
Yeah, I get you. One thing I was thinking about also for decks, know what your deck does, even if it's a precon. Know what the deck does, and know about, I'd say, 80% of the deck.
Ultimately, the most important thing is have a goal in mind and know what you want your deck to do. So, using various precons, they generally will have a theme or two or three they want to work with. The older commander decks, they tend to have a couple of things they're playing around with. Versus nowadays, Wizards has gotten to the point where they're starting to refine them down a little bit more and being a little bit more focused. For example, the Innistrad zombie deck had zombies was the primary theme, but there was also a heavy sacrifice sub-theme, which is why we saw some of those cards in there as well. And those are two synergistic strategies, but strategies that are separate nonetheless. So you could take them in two different directions if you really wanted to.
Yeah, what I was saying was just know your deck a little bit, know the cards in it, because I've ran into the problem of, oh wait, I didn't know this card could do this.
Yeah, generally it goes back to the tried and true concept of sometimes taking a second, reading a card before you putting it in there, and making sure you've got the exact wording you want. If this card says, hey, each player, not each opponent, that can sometimes be pretty relevant if you're dealing out a bunch of damage to the table. The last thing you want to do is go, hey, we're all at 40 life, I'm just gonna do a burn spell that deals 42 points of damage to everybody and can't be countered. Then you've just tied the game out. Let's scoop it up and everyone go back for another game. And it didn't work the way you wanted it to.
Or it may or must. This card, you may be able to do this. Because I've messed that up a couple times.
Yeah, so ultimately it's a matter of trying to make. Ultimately, it's a matter of trying to remember, hey, this card has a triggered ability. When I do this, this is what happens. The other things there are, hey, make sure the exact wording is the way you want it to work, because sometimes those interactions can matter. But once you've kind of narrowed it down, you've gotten your deck together, ultimately, again, using my kind of guideline with what I would generally do in a deck, let's just say we'll just say for ease of example, we've taken 30 cards in the deck for our ramp, draw, removal, and parity breaking. We'll also say we've taken 37 cards for our land slot. That's 67 cards out of our deck already assembled and put aside. We've got our commander, which is going to be our one kind of slot. There we go. Now we're at 68. That gives us a total of 32 cards to play around with on theme that helps us get value or parity out of this. So if we know, for example, okay, I'm 32 and I'm playing Hate Bears or something of the like. So let's just say, for example, it's Gadog T. We're all going to play the fairest game of Magic. Well, now I know I've got 32 slots for different types of utility creatures that are going to shut down various effects throughout the game. That could be Thalia, Guardian of Theravin, which is getting reprinted in the newest Innistrad set.
Ooh.
That could be something like Sanctum Prelate. That could be something like Mother of Runes. So these are going to give you a bunch of cards that you have the opportunity to run. And so at that point, it kind of allows you to establish, how do I want the deck to work? Now that I've got the playability out of the way, and now that I know how I want the deck to work, now it's card selection. What would I personally want to see this deck do with the cards and theme that I have available to me? Once you've kind of got that narrowed in a little bit more, you'll find your deck options or your deck choices to be thinner and thinner. And from there, you may even see that, hey, I've got 10 extra cards I want to fit in the deck, but I don't know how to. And you might have to make some tough calls. It might be, do I need 8 removal spells or can I go down to 7? I want to be the aggressor here. I want to be I want to be the deck that's putting people on the back foot. Maybe I remove some of those wraths or those parity breakers. So ultimately, it's one of those, these are kind of rough guidelines. They're not by any means something that you have to hang your hat on and go, I must build the deck this way. It's just, that's kind of my philosophy of how I like to approach it, is get an idea, get a theme, figure out what I want to do, and work my way toward that goal. And sometimes that'll be, hey, I see a commander, that looks really, really sweet. I want to build around that. And so, okay, cool. I know I'm going to build around the enter the battlefield's triggers. I'm in black, blue, and green, so I've got the 3 best colors for it. Let's go get me a bunch of Wood Elves effects. Let me go get a bunch of bounce effects on creatures. Let me go get some other things like that. As well as other cards that will replicate the ability of my commander. So that way, just because my commander's out of play for the moment, doesn't mean I don't have access to that ability and the deck doesn't function.
Yeah, with the Innistrad stuff, I knew I wanted to build a zombie deck. And, well, the commander deck came out, so that did help me.
Yeah.
But, overall, just know what you want to, kind of know what you want to do and go with it.
Yeah, and I hate to say the 75% method, because I don't agree with that particular philosophy as much as, hey, have some aspect of playability into your deck. Realize it's a multiplayer game. There are going to be threats at this table. You are not the only one here to play a game and try to win the game. So ultimately, you're going to have cards that you need to deal with or that you don't want to see on the table. You can't always trust your opponents to have cards to deal with things, because what if they're building the deck like you are? Oh, somebody else will deal with the problem. And all three, you and your 2 opponents feel that way. Well, then the one guy with the permanent that you don't want on the board is just going to kind of keep control of the game. So having some aspect, even if it's just a few cards here or there in the deck, that's going to give you some flexibility to kind of work in. And
yeah.
I know some people also heavily advocate for tutors. Some people do not like tutors at all. I think tutors are a mixed bag. They are something that if you have them, great. They're a resource. But at the same time, they also have a tendency where decks can play out the same way every game. And that's when it kind of gets a little bit old or too much. So there's a fine line to kind of walk with that. It's just something to be careful of.
I know I have tutors in the Boros deck, but I don't think any of my other decks really use tutors.
I generally like tutors as a silver bullet option. For example, one of my favorite cards, and I know a favorite card of one of our other locals at the game shop, is Sunforger. What it is it's going to go find you a utility tool to deal with a problem. So it's going to either find you a counter spell in the form of Lapse of Certainty or other cards like that. It's going to go find you a removal spell. They're Anguished Unmaking or other cards like that, Wear and Tear. It can go find you a protection spell like Teferi's Protection. So you've got a bunch of options right there at hand. It's just not every tutor is a vampiric tutor where it's pushing more money than I'd like to spend. But you do have some budget options out there. They're a tool in the toolbox, but they're not something that you necessarily have to rely on or have to have fun. Because at the end of the day, everyone has fun in their own ways. It's just another way to play the game.
Just have fun. Be fair to your opponents, too. I'm not calling anyone out. I'm just saying, be fair to your opponents and have fun, guys.
Yeah, and ultimately, at the end of the day, there's no wrong way to build a deck. My first Commander deck, when I got told about the format, and told, hey, yeah, we're going to get down to play some Commander, I built Gisela, Blade of Gold Knight, with like 56 lands, some like Bad Bloodthirst Minotaur, a Boros Reckoner, and some other cards like that, just because I'm like, oh, okay, it's 100 card singleton with 40 life. I'm going to build some... I wanted to build around Gisela, so it's like, okay, cool, I'll build that, and I'll slap some other cards together, and we'll go from there. And, yeah, that was a reality check for me, because I was playing some big boy against some big boy decks like Edric, Spymaster, Tress during its heyday, and other decks like that.
I almost want to see this deck.
I don't even think I have the cards to build this deck anymore. I know I don't actually, because I know I don't have the Gisela.
Hey guys, go down below and tell him you want to see it too, and maybe he can remember most of the cards that are in it, and we'll just do a list.
There's no way I'm going to remember it. It was literally slapped together out of a bunch of box of commons and uncommons. So,
any final thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's one of those play test will do a lot of help for you.
Oh, yes.
As you play the deck, you're going to kind of learn what you want your deck to do a little bit more. Is it too aggressive and doesn't need to rein in or get more ability to keep itself in the game? Is it a deck that needs to be a little bit faster? Because, yes, you're very reactive, but your lack of proactivity is actually keeping you from being able to win the game. Things like that. It's just something you'll learn over time and experience playing the deck. I've kind of been deck building a little bit and been familiar enough with it across several games long enough to know, okay, I can at least generally get an idea of how this works, even if it doesn't work the way I want it to.
Yeah, I've always been bad at building decks. Generally, I don't ever master a game, so deck building has never been my forte. As Z can tell you, I play multiple games.
Yeah.
Like we all do. And, I don't know, deck building. I don't know, is deck building and army list building for 40k the same?
It can be. It can be.
Yeah, maybe that's why I suck at building my army list.
But at the end of the day, as long as you're having fun, that's the biggest thing. It's just, this is kind of a guide to help give you a general idea of how to build, like, an idea or a concept of, hey, I'm wanting to throw together some cards and play the game. What should I be looking into? And those are the kind of ideas that I feel the most predominant or important in the format.
Yes, this isn't how you must do. This is what we believe.
And I'm not going to break it down and say, hey, you have to have this many ramp spells, you have to have this many draw spells, you have to have this many. Yes, I kind of give a rough guide, but I feel it's important to have about, again, I gave a rough number, 8 to 12. Some decks don't need that much, but the really aggressive decks that are going to be emptying their hands all the time, they might want more card draw. Or even the heavy control decks that are going to keep a ton of cards in hand might want more card draw. But that mid-range tempo value deck, they may want to sit at 5 or 6 cards in hand because at the end of the day, they've got the tools for everything. They can just go deal with what they need to deal with as it comes along.
My final thoughts are build a deck to where you can have fun with it. If you can win with it, great. If you're having fun, hey, you're already winning. You don't need expensive cards. Yes, Magic has tons of them. But just have fun, guys. And if you guys have any hints or you guys disagree with us, always go down below. Tell us.
Any tips, tricks, guides you want to leave for anyone? Definitely.
Start a conversation down below on how do you build a deck.
Yeah, and I mean, for perspective, yeah, I'm giving these guidelines to you, but just as kind of like a proof of example, until Tolvar came out, I had a different commander for my actual wolf deck. Not wolves and werewolves, not werewolves, wolf.
Which is a deck tech we're working on, guys.
It's in red-green, but the whole idea being, okay, every card in the deck either needs to interact with a wolf, have a wolf in the picture, or be a wolf itself. Well, obviously it's one of those, I haven't gotten the deck finished yet, hence why you haven't seen a deck tech on it. But the big thing I'm trying to figure out right now is the best way to get my card draw, how to get my ramp package in the deck, how to get some interaction. I'm going to be the hyper-aggressive deck there, so I'm not going to need as many of those board wipes. But just kind of taking it philosophically, it's one of those, I'm on a pretty strict theme. Hey, I've got those 3 restrictions every card in the deck that's not a land has to abide by. The lands have their own special rules they have to go through. So even then, that's if we exempt those 37 cards, that's the rest of the deck that has pretty heavy restriction on it.
And yeah, some people do that. They will put restrictions on what they're doing. Like my zombie deck, I try to stay with mostly zombie tribal, but then I ran into I needed other tribal cards. I needed other cards.
Yeah, and if filler cards are perfectly fine. Generally, those cards are going to be things you want to synergize, or you're going to want them to kind of play into the other aspects of the deck. Again, like I said, it's one of those, you might run Venser, Shaper Savant, as, the creature Venser, basically, as a removal spell. But you also might run it as a counter spell, because it's just going to return the spell to the hand. And you might run it like that, versus it's not like a wizard deck, or it's not like a bounce tribal deck. It's just a removal spell that helps out your deck. And if it's human tribal you're running, well, he also happens to be a human, so you get some loose synergies in your removal slot that way.
There you go.
So those are the kind of things you can look into and try to work and build around.
Yeah. But as always, stay forever new, stay safe, catch you next time. Peace.
Take care.